Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining me on Live with Liz. Today, we are talking about crisis management and damage control before it's too late. So, what on earth are we talking about? We are talking about the fires that pop up from time to time that everyone has to deal with. The interesting part about this for me is that on the corporate side, I had these roles saddled between business and legal. And in these roles, I would often find myself involved in crisis management on the corporate side. And this is something that law firms do as well. So if we look at crisis management for law firms, there are really two big pictures out there. One of them is the crises that the law firm may have to directly deal with that affect their own business. And then the other is the crisis management practice area that law firms offer clients. And I find that lawyers automatically assume the capability of handling crisis management because one, they either offer these services to their clients already or they're on call and this is just part of the job of being a lawyer. Or the other is that, they just already have these systems in place to maybe deal with it. But there are some things that I think a lot of law firms don't consider when these things arise about how to deal with them effectively and how to get beyond a crisis, how to learn from it, and the steps really you need to take when it affects you directly. There are some giant examples of these things, and we're not talking about kind of the little things that people flip out about all the time where you stress out. We're talking about some of the bigger things. For example, maybe you remember Mossack Fonseca and the Panama Papers. This is maybe one of the most striking crises of law firm management that I can think of, where client data is jeopardized to a degree that's unfathomable, released to the public, where all of the clients are really, really in a problem. And the law firm not only has to deal with crisis management for its own reputation, but has to deal with it for the clients as well. And you find that in the crisis management practice area, they're prepared to give these advice to clients based on preventing litigation or the legal aspects surrounding the crisis itself, but they're not necessarily adept at the PR aspect of it. And so the Panama Papers, if you're not familiar with what happened, this is a very interesting story. Definitely recommend reading up on it. Knowing about these crises is a way to prevent them in a manner of speaking. And the other big example that I talk about from time to time is that Leah, crisis management in Brazil. It's not just Brazil, it's everywhere. I live in the US. So from time to time, I have spoken about the Paul Weiss partnership issue. And this is one of the ways that social media can have this instantaneous negative effect on the reputation of an entire practice, a firm, a company, people. So Paul Weiss published their partnership class. If you recall, it was 12 people, very proud of their professional promotions, smiling faces. They were all white and there was only one woman. And the backlash on LinkedIn was absolutely immediate, and they needed to have an interjection PR agency come in, figure out what to do, have a plan in place, execute it, and then move on. And the irony there was that this law firm in the United States that had this happen was a law firm committed to diversity in the first place. And there are some things that don't show up in the pictures and the faces that you see in some of these things. So in the Paul Weiss situation, it was a problem that didn't have to be a problem, but became one very, very quickly. So obviously, the best way to deal with these problems is not to have them in the first place. So there are things that you can do, steps that you can take as lawyers and law firms to mitigate the potential of these things happening, but really to just anticipate that they will happen and be prepared for when they do. That very first thing is, before you even understand the scope of the problem in some cases, to identify the team that's going to be handling the situation. In my experience, the partners of a firm and the lawyers tend to want to be involved every step of the way, especially when it comes to responsiveness, being the face of the fix, taking part in the PR itself. But I strongly recommend that lawyers who are faced with some of these problems have already on hand a PR agency that is external from the firm to assist with the communication involved in the crisis management situation. And so there are really teams of people that you need to identify, but the communications team is one of the biggest. Good morning, Mariana. Lovely to have you here from Buenos Aires. I don't even know what time it is there. So on the other hand, not just the communications aspect, but the fixing aspect. So when you're establishing who's going to handle this, of course, the lawyers and the partners who are stakeholders, the owners of the firms, are going to be involved to a certain degree in how things are managed. But sometimes you are just too close. You need to take a step back, and you need to make sure that you have people who you can rely on to do this. Interestingly enough, I find that lawyers, many of you already know this, but sometimes it's not something that you think about until you're actually in the situation. Spend some time, even right now, take 30 seconds. Lawyers, who is your lawyer? Because you may need a law firm to step in and help you with this situation, and you want to know who they are. Hey, Rachel, nice to see you. So when you're identifying that team, you make sure that you have those two groups taken care of and that you already know who they might be. Now, different situations will call for different teams to be assembled. But if you anticipate this in advance, it will happen much quicker. And the faster you can deal with it, the faster you can move beyond it. When you're looking at the crisis, you can kind of divide it into 3 phases. Maybe that first phase is before a crisis ever happens. Then you've got how you're handling it while it's happening. And then at the end of it, after it's over, you've got kind of the post-crisis analyses and what you learn from it and how you prevent the next one. So having this team established that handles your communication part of it, and that also handles the fix, working intimately, empowered to make decisions that are best for the firm, of course, working with the legal people involved to make sure that you're not violating any rules and causing any additional scandal as it happens. Now, some lawyers, especially those that offer the crisis management solutions, could get involved to a point that it causes more harm than good. So sometimes lawyers end up being the face of a crisis for their clients. This is not necessarily always good. Now, you know, I don't often get political on here. Wait, yes, I do. I get political. But the best example that in recent history I can think of causing more harm than good, or just being interesting, is Giuliani and the Landscape Company. So if you haven't seen that PR snafu from a lawyer handling a crisis, Google Giuliani Landscaping Company, because that really happened. Okay, so you've identified your team. What are they going to do? Well, obviously you have to have a plan on how to deal with these things. You really need to assess the situation and figure out the scope as quickly as possible. You know that you're in a crisis when your clients start calling and asking, what the heck is going on? You know that the crisis is worse when clients immediately start leaving. This is when you are deep, deep fire. I was going to say another word, but I chose not to. This is the time when you will be thankful that you have in place how to deal with this situation. Because as lawyers, rather than being involved in necessarily the fix or the communications aspect, you may be doing ground control with all of your clients. That is something else that you need to prepare for in advance. How are you going to maintain your practice, keep the decorum, protect your mental health along the way, and really come out of it ahead on the other side? Having learned something, maybe you can turn that crisis into a teachable moment that you've thrived from, that you've become a better practice because you've gone through this crisis, that you've gotten now experience that you can transition into something beneficial for your clients. These are the things that your team, if you've assembled a good one, are going to be thinking about as they respond and as they prepare the communications that inevitably will have to go out. Now, a lot of lawyers, the standard advice from lawyers in any crisis situation I've been involved in from the get-go is don't say a word. Shut it. Don't talk to the press. Don't post on social media. Don't put out a press release. Don't take care of this yourself. Just don't say a word. That advice is classic and may need to be applied to your own situation. Rely on the people who you've assembled, the experts in PR, the experts in communication, even the people on your internal team, to work with the lawyers involved to make that determination. Especially when you have clients calling you all the time, from the get-go of one of these situations, and if you've got clients leaving or clients concerned, then you know that you might need to get ahead of this publicly and figure out a way around it. And there are other scandals that are obviously preventable if you have policies in place on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So you might find that you've got a larger practice and then all of a sudden 6 people in one of your offices are caught up in paying for sex scandal or something like gambling or something like not protecting clients' information. And these are things that are preventable. So when we're looking at these crises, not everything is a crisis, but the best advice is still anticipate, prevent, anticipate, identify the team ahead of time, be able to respond immediately, take a step back from the situation if you're too close to it as a lawyer or law firm who owns it, assess the scope, and make sure that it's something that you can learn from, overcome, and continue on. Now, what happens in the absolute worst case scenario? It's such an event that you have no choice but to fold. That is a real life situation that has happened to different firms. And these are firms that didn't have the plan in place or didn't have the team to deal with the communications. And the fallout was so swift that they weren't able to overcome it. They lost all of their clients or too many of them. And it's not just about losing clients, it's about the risk to the clients that your behavior might create. So that exposure that's out there that you're worried about for them and for you. And if the worst comes to pass, then you might need to have actual third parties come in to help manage the closure and situation so that you can leave it with grace. That's the worst case. Don't think about that necessarily right now. Think about the other parts first so that you don't get into that situation to begin with. Firm Forward does PR related to crisis management. We have people who can help respond on the communication side to work with the lawyers on your team to figure out what the best approach is to informing people of what's happening, how you're fixing it, and how to get out of it. And sometimes that involves very quick action. So if you need us, we're here, solutions@firmforward.com. If you just want to look over a preventative step or a measure or a plan or need help identifying the team that can help respond to these things, whether you have your own internal marketing team that can help from a communication standpoint, that have all of the knowledge necessary to be able to quickly respond, or if you have those partners assembled who are identified ahead of time that say these partners are going to be responsible for dealing with a crisis when it happens, these are the ones who are going to get proper training involved. Learn from the other firms that are out there that are offering this as a service if your firm doesn't already offer it as a service. And sometimes it's take your own advice. If you've already got these systems in place, you might just need to apply them to your own practice so that you are able to prevent, respond, and analyze and learn from these situations as they arise. Sometimes you might not even know that you're in a crisis until it's gone and it's too late. So maybe one of the things that would be beneficial is to kind of look back and see if there was any moment throughout your year or the last 5 years where you had a rush of clients leaving you, or you had something unexplained happen to your revenue all of a sudden, where you didn't even realize that maybe there was client departure for something that you weren't thinking of, but you had a dip in revenue. Get to the bottom line, figure out why these things happened. So, there are also other ways to respond that I really respect. And when I was working in corporate, there were a couple of lawyers who didn't flip out and who say, hold on, take a breath. Most of these situations don't involve life or death. Most of these situations are manageable. Let's just figure out what it is and calmly deal with it. Call your lawyer. Lawyers, you might need to call your lawyer too. If you need us, we're here. We look forward to seeing you every week on Live with Liz, 9 o'clock Houston time on Wednesdays. Join us next week. And if you have questions in the meantime about anything related to business development or marketing for your law firm, let us know, solutions@firmforward.com, and we will respond to you as promptly as we can. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.